Learn English through Stories H29 PDF. Adapted and modified by Kulwant Singh Sandhu. Contents: The Golden Fortress. 1. 7 and 8. 2. Grammar page, verb plus preposition 5. 1. The Golden Fortress. 7. I woke for a few moments in the middle of the night, God knows what time it was, and saw Feluda scribbling something in his blue notebook by the light of the bedside lamp. I don't know how long he stayed awake, but when I woke at 6:30, he had showered, had a shave, and was dressed to go out. According to him, when your brain works at high speed, you tend to sleep a lot less, but that does not affect your health. At least, that's what he believes. In the last 10 years, I have not known him to be ill, even for a single day. Even here in Jaipur, he was doing yoga every day. By the time I left my bed, he had finished his exercises. When we went to the dining room for breakfast, we met everyone else. Lalmohan Babu had moved to the circuit house the previous night. He had been given a room only 2 doors away Mandar Bose. We found him eating an omelette. He had thought of a wonderful plot, he told us. Dr. Hajra still seemed upset. He had not slept well. Only Mukul seemed totally unperturbed. Mandar Bose decided to be direct with Dr. Hajra. "Please don't mind my saying this," he began, "but you're dealing with such a weird subject that you're bound to invite trouble. In a country where superstition runs rife, isn't it better not to meddle with such things? One day, you'll find little boys in every household claiming to be Jadismers. If you look closely, you'll find that their parents want a little publicity. That's all there is to it. But what are you going to do if that happens? How many kids will you take with you and travel all over the country?" Dr. Hajra made no comment. Lalmohan Babu simply cast puzzled glances from one to the other, for no one had told him about Mukul being able to recall his past life. Feluda had already told me that after breakfast, he wanted to go to the main market. I knew he had some other motive. It could not be just to see more of the city or to shop. We left at 7:45, accompanied by Lalmohan Babu. I tried a couple of times to imagine him as a ferocious foe, but the mere idea was so laughable that I had to wipe it from my mind. The area around the circuit house was quiet, but the main city turned out to be noisy and congested. The old wall was visible from virtually every corner. Along that wall stood rows of shops, tongas, houses, and much else. Remnants of a 500-year-old city were now inextricably tangled with the modern Jaipur. We walked through the bazaar, looking at various shops. I could tell Feluda was looking for something specific, but had no idea what it was. Suddenly, Lalmohan Babu asked, "What is Dr. Hajra's subject? I mean, what is he a doctor of? This morning, Mr. Trotter was saying something." "Hajra is a parapsychologist," Feluda replied. "Parapsychologist?" Lalmohan Babu frowned. "I didn't know you could add para before psychologist. I know you can do that to typhoid. So, does it mean it's half psychology, just as paratyphoid is half typhoid?" "No, in this case para means abnormal, not half. Psychology is a complex subject in any case. Parapsychology deals with its more obscure aspects." "I see. And what was all that about a Jadismer?" "Mukul is a Jadismer. At least, that's what he's been called." The Lalmohan Babu's jaw fell open. "He'll get plenty of material for a plot," Feluda continued. "That young boy talks of a golden fortress he saw in a previous life, and the house where he lived had hidden treasure buried under the ground. Are we going to look for those things?" The Lalmohan Babu's voice grew hoarse. "I don't know about you. We certainly are." Lalmohan Babu stopped, bang in the middle of the road, and grasped Feluda's hand with both his own. "Mr. Mitter, this is the chance of a lifetime. please don't disappear anywhere without taking me with you. That's my only request. But I don't know where we're going next. Nothing's decided. Lalamohan Babu paused for a while, deep in thought. Then he said, Will Mr. Trotta go with you? Why? Would you mind if he did? That man is powerfully suspicious. There was a stall by the roadside, selling nagras. Most people in Rajasthan wear these shoes. Feluda stopped at the stall. Powerful he might be. Why suspicious? He asked. When we were traveling to Bikaner yesterday, he was bragging a lot in the car. Said he had shot a wolf in Tanganyika. Yet I know that there are no wolves anywhere in Africa. I have read books by Martin Johnson. No one can fool me that easily. So what did you say? What could I say? I could hardly call him a liar to his face. I was sitting sandwiched between those two men. You've seen how broad his chest is, haven't you? At least 45 inches. Both sides of the road were lined with huge cactus bushes and prickly pear. If I dared to contradict him, he'd have picked me up and thrown me behind one of those bushes, and then in no time, I'd have turned into fodder for vultures. Great squadrons of vultures would have landed on me and had a feast. You think so? How many vultures could possibly feed on your corpse? Ha 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 ha! Feluda had, in the meantime, taken off his sandals and put on a pair of nagras. He was walking back and forth in front of the stall. Very powerful shoes. Are you going to buy those? Lalamohan Babu asked. Why don't you try on a pair yourself? Feluda suggested. None of the shoes were small enough to fit Lalamohan Babu, but he did slip his feet into the smallest pair that could be found and gave a shudder. Oh my God, this was made from the hide of a rhino. You'd have to be a rhino yourself to wear such shoes. In that case, you must assume that 90% of Rajasthanas are rhinos. Both men took the nagras off and wore their own shoes again. Even the shopkeeper began laughing, having realized that the Babis from the city were having a little joke. We left the stall and walked on. From a pawn shop, a film song was being played very loudly on a radio. That reminded me of Durga Puja in Calcutta. Over here, people celebrated not Durga Puja, but Dasara. But that was a long way away. A few minutes later, Feluda suddenly stopped at a shop selling stoneware. It was a prosperous-looking shop called Solanki Stores. Displayed in the showcase were beautiful pots, bowls, plates and glasses, all made of stone. Feluda was staring at those fixedly. The shopkeeper saw us, came to the door, and invited us into his shop. Feluda pointed at a bowl in the glass case and said, "May I see it, please?" The shopkeeper did not pick up the bowl that was displayed. Instead, he took out an identical one from a cupboard. It was beautiful, made of yellow stone. I couldn't remember having seen anything like it before. Was this made here? Feluda asked. It was made in Rajasthan, but not in Jodhpur. No, where was it made then? Jaisalmer. This yellow stone can be found only in Jaisalmer. I see. I had heard of Jaisalmer, but only vaguely. I didn't know where exactly in Rajasthan it was. Feluda bought the bowl. Then we took a tanda back to the circuit house. It was 9:30 by the time we returned after a most bumpy ride. But it did mean that after such a journey, our breakfast was certainly digested. Mandar Bose was sitting outside in the corridor, reading a newspaper. "What did you buy?" he asked, looking at the packet in Feluda's hand. "A bowl. After all, I must have a Rajasthani memento." "I saw your friend go out." "Who, Dr. Hajra?" "Yes. I saw him leave in a taxi at around 9 o'clock. And Muko? He went with him. Perhaps they've gone to talk to the police. After what happened yesterday, Hajra must still be quite shaken. Lalmohan Babu returned to his room, on the grounds that he had to work on his new plot and change it a little. We went to ours. "Why did you suddenly buy that bull, Faluda?" I asked. Faluda sat down on the sofa, unwrapped the bowl and placed it on the table. "There is something special about it," he said. "What's so special?" "Here is a bowl made of stone. Yet if I were to say it was a golden bowl, I wouldn't be far wrong. I have never seen anything like this in my life." After this, he lapsed into silence and began turning the pages of a railway timetable. There was little that I could do. I knew Faluda wouldn't open his mouth, at least for an hour. Even if I asked him questions, he wouldn't answer. So I left the room. The corridor was now empty. Mandar Bose had gone. So had the European lady who had been sitting at the far end earlier on. The sound of a drum reached my ears. Then someone started singing. I looked at the gate and found a boy and a girl, who looked like beggars. The boy was beating the drum and the girl was singing. They were walking towards the corridor. I went forward. When I reached the open space, suddenly I felt like going upstairs. I'd been walking past the staircase every day. I knew there was a terrace upstairs, but hadn't yet seen it. So I climbed up the steps. There were 4 rooms upstairs. To the east and west of these was an open terrace. The rooms appeared to be unoccupied. Or it could be that the occupants had all gone out. I went to the western side. The fort was clearly visible from here, looking quite majestic. The 2 beggars downstairs were still singing. The tune of their song sounded familiar. Where had I heard it before? Suddenly I realized it was very similar to the tune I had heard Mukel hum at times. The same tune was being repeated every now and then, but it did not sound monotonous. I went closer to the low wall that surrounded the terrace. It overlooked the rear portion of the circuit house. There was a garden at the back as well. I was considerably surprised to see it. All I had seen from one of the windows in our room was a single juniper tree standing at the back, but that gave no indication that there were so many trees spread over such a large area. What was that bright blue object glittering behind a tree? Oh, it was a peacock. Most of its body was hidden behind the tree, so at first I couldn't see it properly. Now it emerged and was pecking the ground. Was it looking for worms? As far as I knew, peacocks ate insects. Suddenly something I'd once read about peacocks came back to me. It is always difficult to find a peacock's nest. Apparently, they manage to choose the most inaccessible spots to lay their eggs and raise their young. The peacock was moving forward, taking slow, measured steps, craning its neck, and occasionally looking around. Its long tail followed the movement of its body. Suddenly, the peacock stopped. It craned its neck to the right. What had it seen? Or had it heard something? The peacock moved away. Something had disturbed it. It was a man, standing right below the spot where I was. I could see him through the gaps in the trees. The man had a turban on his head. It wasn't very large. He had wrapped a white shawl around himself. As I was standing above him, I could not see his face. All I could see were his turban and his shoulders. His arms were hidden under the shawl. He began walking stealthily, moving from the western side of the building. I was on the terrace facing the west. Our room was on the ground floor, in the opposite direction. I wanted to see where the man was going. So I ran past the rooms in the middle of the terrace and leant over the wall on the eastern side. The man was standing below me once again. If he looked up, he would see me. But he didn't. He was creeping closer to our room, to one of its windows. Then one of his hands slipped out from under the shawl. What was that, close to his wrist, glinting in the sun? The man stopped. My throat felt dry. Then he took another step forward. Suddenly, a loud, harsh sound broke the silence. The peacock had cried from somewhere. The man gave a violent start, and at the same moment I screamed, "Faluda!" The man in the turban turned and ran in the same direction from which he had come. He disappeared in a matter of seconds. I sprinted down the stairs, taking 2 steps at a time, ran along the corridor without stopping, crashed straight into Faluda at the door to our room, and stood there stunned. Faluda pulled me inside and asked, "What's the matter? What happened?" "I saw from the roof a man, wearing a turban, walking towards your window." "What did he look like, tall?" "Don't know. Saw him from a height, you see. On his hand was a what?" "Watch." I thought Faluda would either laugh the whole thing off or tease me by calling me an idiot and a coward. He did neither. Looking a little grim, he simply peered out of the window and looked around. Someone knocked on our door. "Come in." A bearer came in with coffee. "Salam, Saab." He placed the tray on the table and took out a folded piece of paper from his pocket. He handed it to Faluda, saying, "Manager Saab asked me to give it to you." He left. Faluda read the note quickly, then flopped down on the sofa with an air of resignation. "Whose letter is that, Faluda?" "Read it." It was a short note from Dr. Hajra, written on a sheet of paper that had his name printed in a corner. It said, "I believe it is no longer safe for me to remain in Jodhpur. I am going somewhere else, where I hope to have better success. I see no reason to drag you and your cousin into further danger. So I'm leaving without saying goodbye. I wish you both all the very best. Yours, H29. He has acted most hastily," Faluda spoke through clenched teeth. Then he made for the reception desk without even drinking his coffee. "Today we found a different man at the desk." "Did Dr. Hajra say when he was going to be back?" Faluda asked. "No, sir. He paid all his bills. Said nothing about coming back." "Do you know where he has gone?" "To the railway station. That's all I know." Faluda thought for a moment. Then he said, "It's possible to go to Jaisalmer by train from here, isn't it?" "Yes, sir. We've had a direct line for 2 years." "When is the train?" "It leaves at 10 o'clock at night." "Is there a train in the morning?" "Yes, but it goes only up to Pokhran. It should have left half an hour ago. One can go to Jaisalmer by this train, if one can arrange a car from Pokhran." "How far is it from Pokhran?" 70 miles. "What other trains go from Jodhpur in the morning? I mean, to other destinations?" The man consulted a book, leafing through a few pages. "A train leaves for Barmer at 8 o'clock, and at 9 there's the Rewari passenger, that's all." Faluda's fingers beat an impatient tattoo on the counter. "Jaisalmer is about 200 miles from here, isn't it?" "Yes, sir." "Could you please arrange a taxi for us? We would like to leave for Jaisalmer at 11:30. "Certainly, sir," the receptionist picked up a telephone. "Where are you off to?" asked a voice. It was Mandar Bose, coming out of his room with a suitcase in his hand. He had just had a shower and was smartly dressed. "I'd like to see the Thar Desert," Faluda replied. "Oh?" So you're going to the northwest? I'm off to the east. You are leaving Jodhpur too? My taxi should be here any minute. I don't like spending a very long time in any one place. Besides, if you leave as well, the circuit house will become empty in any case. The receptionist finished talking into the phone and turned to us. It's arranged, he said. Topsh, Faluda said to me. Go and see if you can find Lalmohan Babu. Tell him we are going to Jaisalmer. If he wants to come with us, he should get ready immediately. I ran towards room number 10. It was not clear to me why we were suddenly going to Jaisalmer. Why did Faluda choose Jaisalmer of all places? Was it because it was close to the desert? Had Dr. Hajra and Mukul also gone there? Did this mean that we were no longer in any danger? Or were we going to walk straight into it? 8. Pokhran was 120 miles from Jodhpur. Jaisalmer was another 70. It should not take more than 6 or 7 hours to cover 190 miles. Or at least, that was what our driver, Gurbachan Singh, told us. He was a plump and cheerful Sikh. I saw him taking his hands off the steering wheel at times and clasping them behind his head. Then he would lean back in his seat and take a little rest. But the car stayed on course because Gurbachan rested the steering wheel on his fat paunch, even moving it when necessary, without putting his hands back on it. This action was actually not as difficult as it may sound, for there was virtually no traffic on the road. Besides, the road ran straight, without curves or bends, for as much as 5 or 6 miles in many places. Unless something went wrong, we would reach Jaisalmer by 6 o'clock in the evening. The scenery started to change when we were only 10 miles out of Jodhpur. I had never seen anything like it. Jodhpur had a number of hills around it. The fort there was made of red sandstone that came from those hills. But now those hills disappeared and were replaced by an undulating terrain that stretched right up to the horizon. It was a mixture of grass, red earth, sand, and loose stones. Ordinary trees and plants had disappeared too. Now all I could see were acacia, cacti, and similar plants whose names I didn't know. The other thing I noticed was wild camels. They were roaming freely, like cattle and sheep. Some were light brown, like milky tea. Others had darker coats, closer to black coffee. I saw one of them munching on a thorny plant. Faluda said that the thorns frequently injured a camel's mouth, but since those bushes were its only source of food, the camel put up with the discomfort. Faluda also told me a little about Jaisalmer. It was built in the 12th century and became the capital of the Bati Rajputs. Only 64 miles from there was the border between India and Pakistan. Even 10 years ago, going to Jaisalmer was quite difficult. There were no trains, and what roads there were often disappeared under the sand. The place was so dry that if it rained just for a day in a whole year, people thought they were lucky. When I asked him about battles, Faluda said a Lauding Khilji had once attacked Jaisalmer. We had traveled for nearly 90 kilometers, 56 miles, when purely out of the blue we got a puncture, which made the car give an unpleasant shriek, lurch and come to a halt by the side of the road. I felt quite cross with Gurbachan Singh. He had assured us that he had checked the pressure in each tire and all was well. As a matter of fact, the car appeared to be new and in good condition. We got out with Gurbachan. It would take at least 15 minutes to change the tire. As soon as our eyes fell on the flat tire, we realized what had caused the puncture. Strewn over a large area on the road were hundreds of nails. It was obvious that they were new and had been bought recently. We exchanged glances. Gurbachan let out an expletive through clenched teeth that I shall not repeat here. Faluda said nothing. He simply stood there, arms akimbo, and stared at the road, deep in thought. His brows were drawn together in a frown. Lalmohan Babu took out a green notebook. It looked like a diary, from an old Japan Airlines bag, and scribbled something in it with a pencil. By the time we finished changing the tire, removed all the nails from the road, and were ready to leave, it was 1:45. Faluda said to Gurbachan, "Satyajit, please keep an eye on the road. You can see that our enemies are trying to make things difficult for us. However, it wouldn't do to go too slowly if we were to reach Jaisalmer before nightfall." So Gurbachan Singh reduced his speed from 60 to 40. If he were to keep his eye on the road all the time, he could hardly move faster than 10 or 15 miles an hour. About 40 miles later, when we had covered almost 100 miles, the second disaster hit us. It simply could not be avoided. This time, instead of nails, thousands of drawing pins had been strewn over at least 20 feet of the road. Obviously, whoever wanted us to have a flat tire was not taking any chances. What was also obvious was that Gurbachan Singh did not have another spare tire. We all climbed out again. If Gurbachan had not been wearing a turban, he would probably have scratched his head. Faluda asked him, "Is Pokhran a town or a village?" "It is a town, Babu." "How far is it?" "About 25 miles. "Oh God! What are we going to do?" Gurbachan tried to be reassuring. Every taxi that plied on that road, he said, was known to him. If we waited until another taxi came along, he would borrow a spare from its driver. Then we could go to Pokhran and have our own punctured tires mended. The question was, would a taxi come along? If so, when? How long were we supposed to wait in the middle of nowhere? A group of 3 men passed us by, leading 5 camels. They were going in the direction of Jaipur. Each man had such dark skin that it looked almost black. One of them sported a snowy white beard and sideburns. I saw Lalmohan Babu move closer to Faluda, possibly because he had caught the man casting curious glances at us. "Which is the nearest railway station from here?" Faluda asked, removing the pins from the road. We had all joined him in this good deed to save other cars from a similar fate. "Brandiora. It is 7 or 8 miles from here." "Brandiora." When all the pins had been removed, Faluda took out a Bradshaw timetable from his shoulder bag. One particular page was folded. Faluda opened the timetable at that page, ran his eye over it and said, "It's no use, the morning train that leaves Jodhpur reaches Ramdiora at 3:45. It must have left Ramdiora by now." "But isn't there another train to Jaisalmer at night?" I asked. "Yes, but that will reach Ramdiora very early in the morning, at 3:53. If we began walking now, we'd take at least 2 hours to get to Ramdiora. There might have been a point in walking all that way, if there was any chance of catching the morning train. We could then have traveled to Pokhran, if nothing else. Now in this godforsaken—" Faluda broke off. Even under such difficult circumstances, Lalmohan Babu smiled and said in a somewhat unsteady voice, "Well, you must admit such a situation would be easier to find in a novel, who knew even in real life." Rather unexpectedly, Faluda raised a hand and stopped him. Our surroundings were completely silent, as if the entire world here had turned mute. In that silence, a faint noise reached our ears. There could be no mistake. Chud 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 chud. It was a train, the train to Pokhran. But where was the track? I stared in the direction from which the noise was coming, and suddenly noticed a column of smoke. Almost immediately, I spotted a telegraph pole. I hadn't seen it before because the ground sloped down and the red pole practically merged with the reddish-brown earth. Had it been standing on higher ground, outlined against the sky, it would have been far more easily visible. "Run!" shouted Faluda and began running towards the smoke. I followed suit. Lalmohan Babu followed me. To my amazement, he ran so fast, despite his thin and scraggy appearance, that he nearly caught up with Faluda, leaving me behind. I could see grass under my feet, but instead of being green, it was as white as cotton wool. We scrambled down the slope, still moving as fast as we could, and reached the railway track. The train was now within 100 yards. Without a second's hesitation, Faluda jumped into the middle of the track and began waving madly, both his arms raised high. The train began whistling loudly, but drowning the sound of the whistle rose Lal Mohan Babu's voice. "Stop, stop, halt, I say." Nothing worked. It was a small train, but not like the ones that Martin and Co. once used to run. If one stood by the tracks and raised a hand, those trains would stop, just like buses. This train, however, did nothing to reduce its speed. Whistling mightily, it came dangerously close, at which point Faluda was obliged to spring to safety. We simply stood and watched as the train coolly passed us by, clanging on its way, hiding the bright sun momentarily behind thick, black smoke. Even at a time like that, I couldn't help thinking that I might have seen such a scene only in a Hollywood Western. Not once did I ever imagine I'd get to witness a scene like that in my own country. "Such arrogance," remarked Lal Mohan Babu when the train had gone. "It didn't look bigger than a caterpillar, did it?" "Bad luck," muttered Faluda. "That train was running late, yet we couldn't take advantage of that. If we could have somehow got to Pokhran, we might have found another taxi." Gurbachan Singh, with great thoughtfulness, had collected our luggage and was carrying it over, but now there was no need for it. I glanced briefly at the track. All that could be seen was smoke. Suddenly, Lal Mohan Babu spoke excitedly. "What about camels?" he said. "Camels? Over there, look!" Yes. Another group with camels was coming our way, this time from the direction of Jodhpur. "Good idea, let's go." At Faluda's words, we began running again. When a camel really gets going, I've heard that it can cover 20 miles in an hour, Lal Mohan Babu told me as he ran. We managed to stop the group. This time there were 2 men and 7 camels. "We need 3 camels and we want to go to Ramdiora. How much would that be?" asked Faluda in Hindi. Then it turned out that the men spoke some local dialect. However, they could understand a little Hindi and speak it, too, albeit haltingly. Gurbachan spoke on our behalf. In the end, they agreed to lend us their camels for 10 rupees. "Can your camels run fast?" Lal Mohan Babu wanted to know. "We have a train to catch." Faluda laughed. "Don't worry about running, get on the camel first." "Get on its back?" Perhaps for the first time, face to face with a camel, Lal Mohan Babu realized the complexities involved in climbing onto its back. I was looking carefully at the animals. They looked perfectly weird, but had been saddled with care. On their backs were the kind of sheets with fringes and tassels that I'd seen earlier on elephants. On top of this sheet was a wooden seat. The sheet was covered with red, blue, yellow, and green geometric patterns. Each camel had its long neck wrapped with a length of red fabric decorated with cowrie shells. It was clear that in spite of their strange appearance, their owners loved and cared for them. 3 camels were now kneeling on the ground. Gurbachan Singh by this time had fetched every piece of our luggage, which consisted of 2 suitcases, 2 holdalls, and a few smaller items. Gurbachan told us to wait for him in Pokhran if we could catch the train in Ramdiora. He would definitely get to Pokhran that night. Our luggage was tied securely onto 2 of the other camels. The first 3 camels were still waiting for us. "You saw how they sat down, didn't you?" Faluda asked Lal Mohan Babu. "A camel folds its forelegs first, and the front part of its body comes down before its rear. When it gets up, expect just the opposite. It will raise its hind legs first. If you can remember that and lean backwards and forwards accordingly, you can avoid a great deal of embarrassment." "Embarrassment?" Lal Mohan Babu croaked. "Here, watch me." Faluda jumped onto the back of the first camel. One of the men made a funny noise through his teeth. At once, the camel raised itself, quickly but awkwardly, in exactly the same manner that Faluda had just described. But he managed very well. There was no awkwardness. "Come on, Topsh. You two are smaller and lighter than me. It should be easier for you," Faluda called. Both the Rajasthani men were grinning at our antics. I gathered all my courage and got on the second camel, which stood up immediately. Now I could tell where the real problem lay. When the hind legs were raised, the rider on the camel's back was likely to slide forward in one swift motion. If one could lean back and remain in that position as the camel rose to its feet, it would be easier to maintain one's balance. If I ever had to ride a camel again, I must remember that, I told myself. "Dear Jia Adi," said Lalmohan Babu. Kad became Jayad for the simple reason that, even as he was uttering those words, the rear portion of the camel's body jerked into motion and Lalmohan Babu slid forward on its back. In the next instant, he was thrown back in the opposite direction. I heard him gulp noisily as he lay horizontal on the camel's back, cast into an undignified heap. Having said goodbye to Gurbachan Singh, we three Bedouins began our journey to Randiora. "We must get to Randiora in half an hour. It's 8 miles from here, isn't it? We have a train to catch," Faluda yelled to the two men. At these words, one of them jumped up on his camel and marched forward briskly to take the lead. The second man shouted, "Hi, hi," and every camel broke into a run. As it was, the animals were ungainly and not exactly easy to sit on. When they lurched forward, my whole body swung and shook from side to side, but I didn't mind. We were running across a sandy terrain, covered with dry, scorched grass, and the place was Rajasthan, so all in all, it was a thrilling experience. Faluda was ahead of me, and Lalmohan Babu's camel was behind me. Faluda turned his head and called out, "How do you find the ship of the desert, Mr. Gangulai?" I too looked back to see what Lalmohan Babu was doing. I found him making an awful grimace, as if he was in a freezing cold climate. His lips had parted, his teeth were clenched, and the veins on his neck were all standing out. "What's the matter?" Faluda went on. "Why don't you say something?" 6 words emerged from Lalmohan Babu, in 5 installments. "Ship, all right, but talking, impossible." Laughter began bubbling up inside me once again, but I quelled it and focused on the journey. We were now running alongside the railway track. In the distance, a column of smoke seemed to rise for a minute, then it disappeared. The sun was going down in the western horizon, and the landscape was changing. A hazy range of hills was visible in the far distance. On our right was a huge sand dune, unmarked by human feet. It was covered with wavy lines from top to bottom. Perhaps the camels were not used to running fast for any length of time, so their speed faltered every now and then. When that happened, one of the men barked, "Hi, hi," again, and the animals ran faster. Around 4:15, a square structure came into view. It appeared to be a building, right next to the railway track. What could it be if it wasn't a railway station? As we got closer, it became clear that we were right. There was a signal, too. So it had to be a station, and the place had to be Randiora. The camels had slowed down again. But now there was no need to shout at them. The train we were hoping to catch had come and gone. We couldn't tell when it had left, but there could be no doubt that we had missed it. It meant only one thing. Until 3 o'clock in the morning, we would have to wait in this unknown place, in the middle of nowhere, by the side of the tiny structure that was trying to pass itself off as a station. And there was not a soul in sight. 2. Grammar page.